The bar was called Vanix, because I owned it, and I had run out of imagination by the time I needed a name. That was 11 years ago. I had also run out of things I wanted to do that involved other people telling me what to do, which is why the bar existed at all. Me, Bram, 12 stools, a row of bottles that covered 4 species preferences, and a view through the porthole of a docking ring that nobody particularly wanted to use. Vanix sat on Waystation Holt, which sat at a junction point between human-administered space and the outer Veth corridor, which made it strategically irrelevant to everyone, and therefore useful to the handful of people who needed a place to conduct business in irrelevant surroundings. I did good trade in irrelevance. I had learned, running K9 logistics for 8 years before the discharge, that irrelevant locations are where the actual decisions get made. The important rooms are for announcing things. The quiet rooms are for deciding them. Bram was 7 years old and 160 pounds of St. Bernard. He slept under the far end of the counter on a mat I had cut to fit the space exactly, with his chin resting on the rubber floor stop at the base of the wall. He had been doing this since he was 10 months old and had misjudged the mat's dimensions for the first time and just decided the floor stop was close enough. He was not a dog who revised his opinions once formed. This had been, in my experience, one of his more useful qualities. The Veth party arrived on a Thursday, which on Waystation Holt meant nothing except that it was the day the supply shuttle came, and the docking ring smelled briefly of recycled atmosphere and whatever the shuttle crew had been eating. 4 of them. The consul, a Veth diplomat of some seniority, his coloring the deep slate green that indicated rank, his robe the formal gray-black, and 3 aides in the lesser copper-brown. They came in because the Waystation's single conference suite was occupied by a surveying team that had been there for 6 weeks and showed no signs of finishing, and my bar was the next largest enclosed private space. I poured water for the aides and something amber for the consul, because he had the look of a being who had been traveling for a long time and had strong feelings about it. He did not thank me. He set his case on the bar and looked at Bram. Is that animal licensed to be in a food service establishment? He's not in the food service area. He's under the counter. That is the same location. Depends on the regulation you're citing. He decided not to pursue it. The aides spread documents across 2 of the tables, paper, which the Veth still used for formal treaty materials, and which I had always found an interesting choice for a spacefaring civilization, but nobody had asked me. The consul opened his case. Inside, in a preservation sleeve, was a piece of something that was not quite paper and not quite polymer, covered in marks I recognized as early contact Veth administrative script. I kept wiping the counter. The consul explained, to his aides and incidentally to the room, that the document was a fragment of the Holt Accord predecessor material, the contact era record from 312 years ago, the first formal meeting between human and Veth representatives on this same waystation, before the waystation was a waystation, and was still a survey platform. The document contained a passage that Veth legal scholars had been arguing about for 3 centuries. One side said it constituted a prior claim to the corridor junction. The other side said it constituted a recognition of shared passage rights. The argument had produced, at last count, 9 academic conferences, 2 monographs, 1 interspecies incident that didn't quite become a formal dispute, and a current treaty that the consul's government had decided was insufficiently favorable. The disputed passage, he said, concerned something called the patience of the large one. I stopped wiping the counter. He didn't notice. He was explaining to his aides that the phrase had been interpreted variously as a metaphor for human political endurance, hence the claim of territorial patience, and therefore prior rights, or as a descriptor of human military capacity, which would make it a recognition of force and therefore a concession. 300 years of argument. The consul had, he said, a new interpretation, which was that it referred to a specific piece of human military hardware deployed at that first contact, a large payload vehicle of some kind, and that this constituted a demonstration of territorial assertion, not shared rights. His interpretation, if it held, voided the current treaty's corridor provisions. One of the aides asked how he knew what the hardware had been. The consul said he didn't, not precisely, but that the document's context made the military hardware reading the most plausible, and that in the absence of countervailing evidence, the interpretation favored. Bram lifted his head. He did not stand up. He did not cross the room at any speed that could be described as purposeful. He simply got up off his mat the way he always got up off his mat. Slowly, because he was a large dog and his joints were aware of that fact, walked the length of the bar, rounded the end of it with the ponderous and total indifference of something that has decided it would like to be somewhere else, and walked to where the console was standing. He put his chin on the console's boot. He did this the same way he did everything else, not asking, not threatening, just placing his chin there, the way he placed it on the floor stop on his mat, because it was a convenient surface at the right height, and he had decided it would do. The console looked down at him. He looked at the document. He looked at Bram. I put the cloth down. The illustration in the preservation sleeve, I could see it clearly from where I stood, because the console had stopped moving and the sleeve was facing me, was a contact-era sketch. Ink on whatever material they'd had. It showed, in the simple descriptive lines of a recorder, trying to document something for an audience who hadn't seen it, a large animal with its chin resting on the boot of a human figure. The human figure's hand was on the animal's back. The Veth figure in the illustration, standing on the animal's other side, had its arms at its sides. Not threateningly. The sketch had caught the exact posture of a being who has just recalibrated. The caption, in early contact Veth script, translated, as I understood it, to something like, "The patience of the large one is given freely, and we have accepted it, and this is the arrangement." Not hardware. Not territorial assertion. Not a claim. A dog put its chin on somebody's boot 312 years ago, and the Veth had written it down as a diplomatic event, and then argued about what kind of event it was for 3 centuries, because apparently it had never occurred to anyone to ask what the large one was. Nobody had asked the bartender. I reached under the counter and came up with the framed photograph I kept there, the one from the discharge ceremony. Bram at 18 months, me in fatigues, both of us looking at the camera with the same expression, which was mild tolerance. I set it on the bar. I didn't say anything. The consul looked at it for a long moment. Then he picked up the preservation sleeve. He looked at the illustration. He looked at Bram, who had not moved his chin from the boot, and showed no plans to. He looked at the photograph. He set the sleeve back in his case. One of the aides started to say something. The consul put one hand flat on the table, and the aide stopped. "Refill?" I said. The consul picked up his glass. He held it out. I refilled it. Bram walked back to his mat. He made 2 circles in the way he always made 2 circles, for reasons he had never explained, and I had stopped trying to understand, and settled back down with his chin on the floor stop. He was asleep in under a minute. He did not check whether the situation had resolved itself. It had resolved itself. He had known that before he walked over there. The consul sat at the bar for another hour. His aides put the paper documents back in their cases. Nobody opened them again. At some point, one of the aides produced a small recording device and spent several minutes photographing the framed discharge photo, the preservation sleeve illustration, and Bram asleep on his mat. I didn't ask what it was for. I assumed it was for the 9 academics and 2 monograph writers and whoever was running the 10th conference. The consul left a tip that was, by any standard, excessive. The supply shuttle left at 1700. The docking ring went quiet. Bram snored once, loud enough that the last remaining aide, still packing cases by the door, stopped and looked over his shoulder. I put the photograph back under the counter. 300 years of argument. The answer had been under a bar counter on Waystation Holt the whole time, sleeping on a mat he'd picked out himself at 10 months old, waiting for someone to come along and knead his chin on their boot. He had been patient about it. That had always been one of his better qualities.